I always believed weddings brought out the best in families. At least that's what I used to think when I watched my cousins get married over the years. Everyone crowding around, hugging, taking pictures, passing cake, telling stories. My aunts crying in that sweet, sentimental way older women do when they remember raising babies who somehow grew into adults overnight. I imagined mine would be the same, maybe not perfect. My family was never perfect, but at least decent, kind, respectful. But life has a way of humbling you right when you think you're standing on solid ground. The day before my wedding started quietly enough. I'd flown home from Virginia 2 weeks earlier after finishing a stretch of work on base. Nothing dramatic, just routine administrative duties and a few training evaluations. My leave was approved without fuss. My fiancé David had already arrived in town a few days before me, staying with his parents in their comfortable ranch-style home, a few blocks from the old white steeple church where we planned to get married. For a moment, everything looked like the picture-perfect American hometown scene. Mid-June sunshine, church bells marking the hour, neighbors trimming hedges, kids chasing each other through sprinklers. Even my parents seemed manageable, not warm but calm. They'd always been distant with me, especially after I joined the military. But I thought maybe this wedding would be the olive branch we all needed. By late afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, going through last-minute details. She kept her eyes on her list more than on me, but she spoke politely enough. Dad came in and out, barely acknowledging me except to grunt when he passed the refrigerator. My brother Kyle scrolled his phone loudly the way he always did when he wanted attention without earning it. The atmosphere was stiff, like everyone was tiptoeing around something they weren't saying. Still, I stayed hopeful. I'd spent most of my life hoping this family would meet me halfway. Around 6, I headed upstairs to check on my dresses. Yes, plural. I had 4 options hanging neatly in garment bags along one side of my childhood bedroom: a satin A-line, a lace mermaid-style dress, a simple crepe gown, and a vintage one I'd bought from a boutique in Chesapeake. I wasn't a princess dress kind of woman, but I liked having choices, and my fiancé loved seeing me happy, so he encouraged it. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old carpet, just like it always had. I remember unzipping the first garment bag just to look at the dress again, imagining how it would feel tomorrow morning when I put it on. I even laughed quietly to myself, feeling that soft flutter of excitement I'd thought was long gone. I didn't know that moment would be the last piece of peace I'd get from my family. Dinner was awkward but quiet. My father barely spoke. My mother fussed over my brother. Kyle teased me once. Something small, something stupid, but I let it go. I told myself I'd let a lot of things go for the sake of one peaceful weekend. By 9, I went to bed early. I needed the rest, and weddings start early in towns like ours. David called to say goodnight, and for a moment, everything felt safe again. I fell asleep, believing the morning would bring joy, but somewhere around 200 in the morning I woke to the soft, unmistakable sound of whispers. My bedroom door clicked shut, footsteps padded down the hallway. At first, I thought I dreamed it, but then I noticed something wrong. The faint smell of fabric dust. The air felt unsettled, like it had been disturbed. The house was quiet, too quiet. I swung my legs out of bed, turned on the lamp, and looked toward the dresses. The bags weren't hanging evenly anymore. One looked lopsided. Another wasn't zipped. My chest tightened. I stood up, crossed the room, and opened the first zipper. The dress inside was cut clean in half, straight through the bodice, jagged at the bottom where the scissors slipped. My breath vanished. I unzipped the second bag, cut. The third cut. The fourth cut, slashed, ruined beyond repair. I don't remember dropping to my knees, but I did. I felt the floor under my palms before I registered the sound of someone stepping into the room behind me. My father. He didn't look angry. He didn't look ashamed. He looked satisfied. "You deserve it," he said quietly. "You think wearing a uniform makes you better than this family. Makes you better than your sister, better than Kyle, better than me." My mouth opened, but no words came out. My mother stood behind him, eyes averted. My brother's silhouette hovered behind her, arms crossed, wearing that smug half-smile he always got when he knew he wasn't the target. "Get some sleep," Dad said. "The wedding's off." Then they walked out. The door closed, and for the first time in my adult life, after deployments, funerals, promotions, and nights spent awake in foreign countries, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like a lonely, unwanted kid again. But it didn't end there, and it didn't break me, not even close. In the darkness of that room, surrounded by shredded silk and ruined lace, I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't sleep after my parents walked out. I just sat there on the carpet, knees bent, surrounded by what used to be my wedding dresses, laces, torn bodices, sliced fabric dangling like wounded skin. The room felt smaller than ever, shrinking around me with every breath. But something inside me was shifting too, slowly, steadily, like an old engine warming up after sitting in the cold. I'd been through worse. Not in the way that breaks bones, but in the way that breaks a person's sense of worth, deployments, loss, endless nights on watch. I'd come face to face with danger more times than my family would ever understand. And yet somehow this, my own blood turning against me, hit differently. Around 3:00 a.m., I stood up. My legs were shaky but my mind felt strangely clear. The dresses were unsalvageable. Even if a seamstress lived next door, there was no putting them back together. My father had made sure of that. Fine, let the dresses be ruined. Let them lie there like symbols of everything my family thought I wasn't worth. I took a long breath and exhaled through my teeth, steadying my voice. Then I began packing slow, methodical, the way I'd been trained. My heels, toiletries, paperwork for the ceremony, the small photo of my fiancé tucked neatly into its frame, the card he'd given me. Whatever tomorrow looks like, I'll be waiting. I placed it inside my bag, and then, without hesitation, I reached into the back of my closet, past old shoes, past forgotten boxes, to the garment bag I kept for occasions that demanded strength, not softness. My white navy uniform, dress whites, freshly pressed, every button polished, every ribbon, aligned, every medal earned through sweat, grit, and sacrifice. I unzipped the bag just enough to see the shimmer of the shoulder boards. 2 stars. A rank I'd never bragged about. Not once. A rank my parents never acknowledged, never asked about, never celebrated. They didn't respect the life I built, but that uniform did. And I wasn't about to walk into my wedding broken. By 400 m, I carried my bags downstairs. The house was silent. A single lamp glowed in the living room. Mom must have left it on. Maybe she thought I'd come down crying, begging, apologizing for something I never did. But all I felt was calm. I slipped out the front door and into the cool night air. The sky was still dark, pinpricked with stars. Another American dawn waiting just beyond the horizon. I got into my car, turned the key, and the engine hummed softly in the quiet street. No houses stirred. Even the porch lights looked sleepy. I didn't know exactly where to go at first, but instinct led me to the one place that had never judged me, never tried to break me, never told me I deserved pain. Base, the place where discipline and dignity mattered more than ego and favoritism, where people saluted not because of bloodlines, but because of merit. When I reached the gate, the young guard recognized me immediately. His eyes widened, not with fear or confusion, but with respect. "Ma'am, everything all right?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, swallowing the sting in my throat. "Just needed to clear my head," I said. He nodded like he understood far more than I said. "Welcome back, ma'am." Inside, the base was quiet, just a few lights on in administrative buildings and the faint glow of the flag near the main courtyard. I walked toward it slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, each step a little steadier than the last. A familiar voice called out behind me. Couldn't sleep either. I turned and saw Master Chief Hollander, one of those old soul Navy men with weathered skin, sharp eyes, and a heart 10 times larger than he'd ever admit. He'd mentored half the young sailors who passed through our station. He studied my face the way older Americans do, gentle, patient, seeing right through you. "Rough night?" he asked quietly. I could have lied, could have brushed it off, could have said I just needed air, but something about that moment snapped open inside me. "My parents destroyed my dresses," I whispered. "All of them." He blinked slowly, not surprised, just disappointed on my behalf. Then he exhaled. "Families can be cruel in the way strangers never will be." I looked down at my hands. "I don't know what to do next." "That's not true," he said. "You came here. That tells me you already know." I frowned. "Know what?" He nodded toward the chapel dress whites in my bag. "That uniform isn't just something you wear. It's something you earned. It's every long night, every tough call, every sacrifice. That's the real you, not the girl they tried to break." His voice softened, cracking just slightly with age and experience. "They cut your dress because they thought it was your identity. But they can't touch this." He tapped the bag gently. "And they sure as hell can't touch those stars." I don't know what came over me, but I let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. It was the first time that night I felt something other than hurt. Master Chief gave me a final nod. "Go get ready. The world needs to see who you really are." I drove to the small on-base guest quarters and stepped into the room. It smelled of industrial soap and old carpeting. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, safe, neutral. I hung my uniform on the door hook and laid out everything with the precision I'd learned years ago. Collar stiffeners, belt, shoes buffed to a mirror shine, ribbons aligned perfectly, medals arranged with care. When I stepped into the uniform, the weight settled on my shoulders like a familiar friend. Not heavy, comforting. The sun was rising by the time I finished. Soft gold light spilled across the room, catching on the metals, warming the fabric. For a moment, I just looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see a broken bride. I didn't see a daughter begging for approval. I didn't see the girl my father dismissed with 4 words. You deserve it. I saw a woman who survived everything thrown her way. A woman ready to walk into whatever waited for her at that chapel. A woman who would no longer shrink so her family could feel tall. And for the first time that night, I felt proud. By the time I stepped outside the guest quarters, the sun had fully risen over the base, washing everything in a soft golden light. It was that calm, quiet hour on a Saturday morning when most people were still sleeping, when birds chirped lazily from telephone poles, and the flag at top the mast rustled in a gentle breeze. I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in this strange mixture of peace and adrenaline. My heart was steady, my hands calm. The uniform helped, it always did. I checked the time, 2:30. The ceremony would start at 10, guests arriving by 9:30, maybe earlier. It would take me a little under half an hour to reach the chapel. Enough time to arrive before the worst rumors circulated. I knew my parents would spin the story in a dozen directions. She ran off. She's unstable. She's ungrateful. She embarrassed us. But that was the beauty of truth. It didn't need defending. It only needed revealing. I got into my car, adjusting the seat carefully to keep the uniform pristine. Dress whites were unforgiving. One little wrinkle, a single smudge, and even people with bad eyesight could spot it across a room. But I had prepared well. Every crease was perfect, every metal straight, every ribbon aligned. I wasn't dressing to impress them, my family, or the guests. I was dressing because this was who I was when no one could knock me down. The drive into town felt surreal. Houses rolled by porches with rocking chairs, American flags, neighborhood dogs stretching and yawning in driveways. A few older couples were out for their morning walks, as they always were. The world itself seemed normal, steady. Only I carried the storm. As I approached the church, my stomach tightened, not with fear this time, but with anticipation. The parking lot was filling. I recognized familiar cars. David's parents' Cadillac, my Aunt Rosie's old Ford, and my cousin Aaron's Chevy truck. People milled around the entrance, chatting, adjusting ties, smoothing dresses. Guests turned their heads toward me as I pulled in. At first, they didn't recognize me. Then someone pointed, and then the whispers began. I parked and stepped out slowly, letting the full morning light hit the uniform. Silence rippled through the crowd like a soft wave. Older men straightened unconsciously, as men who've served often do when they see another service member. Older women covered their mouths with their hands, eyes widening. And the younger people, they stared the way you stare at a lightning strike, shocked, curious, unsure if it's dangerous or beautiful. My fiance's mother was the first to approach me, a gentle woman with silver hair and warm eyes. She looked me over from head to toe, and then she pulled me into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What did they do to you?" It hit me then. Someone must have told her. Or maybe she'd simply guessed. Mothers like her didn't need details, they just knew cruelty when they saw it. Before I could answer, David appeared beside her. My fiancé. My anchor. He didn't ask what happened, he just breathed out slowly, reached up, and touched the edge of my collar with the softest reverence. "You look like yourself," he said simply. "I'm proud of you." That was all I needed. He offered me his arm, and for a brief second, I thought about letting him walk me in, but not yet. There were things inside that chapel I needed to face on my own. He understood before I even said a word and gave me a firm, supportive nod. "You tell me when you're ready," he said. "I'll be right here." I walked toward the chapel doors alone, not lonely, just alone in purpose. Inside, the air was cooler, still holding on to the night's chill. The organist was flipping through sheet music at the front. Guests whispered behind pews, turning their heads as I moved down the aisle. And there, near the altar, stood my parents. My mother's face registered shock. First, her eyes going wide, her lips parting like she was about to cry, but didn't know how. My father's jaw tightened, his posture stiffened. And my brother, Kyle's reaction was the loudest. "Holy hell, look at her ribbons." His voice cut through the entire chapel like a slap. Heads turned sharply between me and him. A few people gasped out loud. Older veterans in attendance stared at my uniform, their eyes instantly recognizing the significance of every piece on my chest. The room fell silent, a deep, uncomfortable silence. My father's face drained of color. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as his daughter, but as someone beyond anything he had ever understood. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. An aunt whispered, "My God, she's a flag officer." Another murmured to her husband, "Her own parents didn't tell us a thing." The shame settling on my parents' shoulders was almost tangible. It was the weight of truth, an uncomfortable, undeniable truth. I didn't say a word, not yet. I stepped forward slowly, each footfall measured crisp, echoing through the wooden floorboards with quiet power. I stood where a bride would normally stand, soft, glowing, delicate. But I wasn't delicate, and I didn't glow. I stood tall, straight, composed. My father swallowed hard. My mother blinked rapidly, trying to piece the moment together. My brother looked like he wanted to disappear. I could feel dozens of older eyes on me. Grandparents, retired military Sunday churchgoers, people who understood dignity, respect, service, and sacrifice in ways my parents had never bothered to. I didn't even look at them when I finally spoke. I looked only at my parents. This, I said quietly, tapping one ribbon with my finger, is what you tried to cut. My father flinched. My mother's face crumpled. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth didn't shout. It simply stood. And I stood in front of them in full uniform, in full strength, while they stared back at me with faces white as the dress they had destroyed. For a long moment, none of us moved. The entire chapel felt frozen in that heavy silence, like a still photograph where even the dust motes refused to fall. The organist's fingers hovered in midair above the keys. Aunt Rosie's tissue hung halfway to her face. My father stared at me like I was a stranger who'd walked in wearing his daughter's skin. But I didn't look away. I held my ground, every inch of my uniform straight and shining under the stained glass light. If they wanted to break me, they were about to learn just how badly they'd failed. Finally, my mother stepped forward. Not with confidence, not with the stern, brittle authority she'd used my whole childhood. No, she stepped forward. The way someone inches toward a fire they accidentally started, hoping the flames won't jump at them. "Honey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You should have told us." I didn't blink. I did many times. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked back at the guests, at the rows of faces watching every second of this unraveling family drama with horrified fascination. My father cleared his throat. His voice came out rough as if he'd swallowed gravel. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" I asked quietly. Kyle, not to be outdone in stupidity, crossed his arms and scoffed loud enough for everyone in the back pew to hear. "I mean, come on," he said. "You always liked playing soldier." Several veterans in the audience turned their heads so sharply, I thought he might get tackled before the ceremony even started. He swallowed hard, shrinking a little. I looked straight at him. My dresses weren't destroyed by accident. Someone had to pick up scissors. "Kyle," he shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't, it wasn't just me. You helped," I said. "Not a question, a fact." He shut his mouth. My father stepped forward, then puffing up like he was getting ready to lecture me again the way he had all my life. Loud voice, hard stare, expecting obedience without question. But he didn't get the chance. David's father, retired Air Force, a man who commanded respect without lifting a finger, stood up slowly in the second row and cleared his throat. His deep, steady voice rolled through the chapel like distant thunder. "That young woman," he said, pointing at me, "has given more to this country than most people in this room, and she walked in here after being humiliated by her own family." You could have heard a pin drop. He continued, "I don't usually speak during other people's ceremonies, but when I see disrespect that blatant toward an officer, toward a daughter, well, I can't sit quiet." My father's face went a shade paler, if that was even possible. For once in his life he had no words, none that could save him anyway. I didn't plan to humiliate them. That wasn't the point. I simply wanted the truth in the open. So, I took a slow breath and said in a voice steady enough to melt glass, "Last night, the three of you cut my wedding dress in half. All four of them on purpose. And then you told me I deserved it." Gasps echoed through the chapel. More than a few older women shook their heads. Somewhere near the back, a man muttered something like, "Lord have mercy." My mother's face crumpled outward like a collapsing house. I didn't mean we were emotional. You know, weddings, they're stressful. "My uniform has been through worse than stress," I said. "The difference is it never broke." "You did." She reached toward me, then, hesitant, trembling like she wanted to touch my arm. "Maybe apologize. Maybe pretend none of this happened." I took a step back. The message was gentle but undeniable. My father finally found his voice, though it came out strained and thin. "You embarrassed this family," he said. "Wearing that thing." "That thing," I repeated, lifting my chin, "is the reason strangers salute me. It's the reason young women write letters asking for guidance. It's the reason this nation is protected." I let my eyes rest on him for a long, steady moment. "And it's the reason you can sit here in a church pew, safe and comfortable, without ever having lifted a finger for anyone but yourself." A low murmur surged through the older crowd. Some nodded discreetly, some not so discreetly. My father's eyes flickered anger, wrestling with humiliation, but humiliation winning. Then he said it. The sentence he'd held in his pocket all my life, ready to throw whenever he felt his grip slipping. You think you're better than us? I shook my head slowly. No, I just stopped believing I was worse. His jaw locked. My mother covered her mouth. Kyle stared at the floor, and then a small unexpected shift occurred. From the fourth pew, my great-aunt Helen, who had never once meddled in family fights, pushed herself to her feet using her cane and said in a loud, clear voice, "Child, you stand proud. Don't let anyone dim what God clearly lit bright." The congregation murmured. It was approval unmistakable and undiluted. My mother's shoulders sagged. My father lowered his eyes. Kyle slouched so deeply he nearly slid off the pew. The officiant who had been frozen behind the altar this whole time stepped forward carefully. "Would you like to continue with the ceremony?" he asked gently. I looked around the chapel, my fiance's family watching with compassion, my own extended relatives divided between disbelief and admiration, the veterans standing tall, the older couples smiling encouragement, and then I looked back at my parents. The people who were supposed to protect me, love me, raise me with kindness. They had tried to break me. Instead, they had built the strongest version of me they would ever see. I swallowed, lifted my chin slightly, and said, "Yes, we continue." The officiant's question still hung in the air, gentle, careful, like someone trying not to touch a bruise. "Would you like to continue with the ceremony?" I answered yes, but the word hadn't even settled into the air before my father stood up sharply, the wooden pew groaning beneath the sudden movement. His face twisted with something between fury and fear, and for a second, I thought he might shout. Instead, he pointed a trembling finger at me like he was accusing me of a crime. "This isn't right," he muttered. "A wedding isn't supposed to look like this." I turned toward him slowly. "What part isn't right?" I asked. "The fact that I showed up or the fact that I'm standing?" He blinked in rapid, uneven bursts, tiny panicked fluttering that betrayed everything he was trying to hide. "You made a spectacle," he said, though his voice cracked. "You humiliated your mother." I raised an eyebrow. "My mother?" Then, with a controlled breath, "Or did the humiliation begin when you cut my dresses?" A ripple moved through the guests. Older couples murmuring, veterans stiffening their backs, relatives exchanging glances that spoke decades of quiet judgment they'd once kept to themselves. My mother, who had been shrinking smaller with every passing second, finally broke. She covered her face with her hands and let out a muffled, choked sob. Not a sob of remorse. No, I knew that sound. It was embarrassment. Shame being forced into daylight. My father glared at her. "Stop crying." She only cried harder. Kyle finally spoke, voice sharp and defensive. "You're ruining everything." I turned my head toward him. He shifted back instinctively like a child caught stealing cookies, but he still tried to stand tall. "You could have just worn one of the dresses," he muttered. "They were all destroyed," I reminded him, keeping my tone even. "All 4 of them." He swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed like he'd choked on his own guilt. My father snapped. "She's lying." A veteran in the 3rd row, a Navy retiree with a thick white mustache and a posture still straight despite his age, stood abruptly. "Son," he said, voice deep and unwavering. "If that officer says her dresses were destroyed, then they were destroyed. And the fact you're arguing with her instead of apologizing tells me all I need to know." The entire chapel fell into another stunned silence. My father stammered, looking around like the walls themselves were betraying him. We didn't mean." She's twisting the story." "Am I?" I asked softly. My mother slowly lowered her hands. Her mascara was smudged, her expression strained. She looked around at the congregation, the onlookers, who suddenly saw her clearly without filters or tall tales. Her voice came out brittle. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." My chest tightened, not from pity but from recognition. She wasn't apologizing, she was regretting exposure. I took a breath. "What I asked gently, was it supposed to do break me enough to cancel the wedding? Teach me a lesson?" She looked down at her shoes. Her silence was answer enough. My father's composure finally snapped. His voice rose not to yell, but in that harsh whisper men use when they're humiliated in public. "You were supposed to be grateful for everything we've done." "What you've done," I interrupted quietly, "or what you've taken credit for." His face reddened. "Watch yourself." "I have," I said, "my entire life." A murmur spread again among the guests, a soft wave of approval. Not noisy but unmistakable. I looked at the officiant and then back at the crowd. "Before we continue," I said clearly, "I want to make one thing clear." Every pair of eyes focused on me. "This wedding is going forward, but I am not walking down that aisle with people who tried to sabotage my life less than 24 hours ago." My father stiffened. "You can't exclude us." I lifted my chin steady as stone. "I can and I am." My mother gasped softly. Kyle's mouth dropped open. "You think you're something special now?" My father spat. "No," I answered. I think I finally stopped pretending I'm not. The chapel doors creaked open from behind, interrupting the tension. A figure stepped in, tall, silver-haired, dignified, retired Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell, one of my earliest mentors, and someone I'd quietly invited to the wedding. He hadn't told me if he'd make it, but here he was. The moment he saw me standing there in dress whites, his eyes softened. He walked down the aisle with the kind of quiet authority only older Americans possess, the kind earned through time-lost discipline, and love for a country that took pieces of them long before it gave anything back. He stopped beside me. "Ma'am," he said, voice warm and deeply respectful. "Do you have someone to walk you?" My breath caught. I shook my head. He offered his arm. "Then allow me." My mother let out a soft cry. Real this time. My father's posture broke like a snapped branch. Kyle looked away, unable to sit in the truth any longer. Older members of the chapel nodded approvingly. A few wiped their eyes. Someone whispered, "That's what family looks like." I placed my hand gently on Admiral Caldwell's arm. But before we walked forward, I turned back to the people who had caused so much pain. I didn't yell. I didn't blame. I didn't curse them, even though God knew I had reason to. Instead, I said the words I needed to say for myself. "You can stay," I told them, voice soft but unshakable, "but you will not dictate my life anymore. Not today. Not ever again." My father swallowed. My mother clutched her tissue. Kyle stared down at his feet. Then, without another word, I turned forward as the organist, finally understanding what needed to happen, began to play the first notes of the processional. Admiral Caldwell leaned in slightly and whispered, "Proud of you." I blinked rapidly, holding everything together with the kind of poise the Navy had trained into me. "Thank you, sir," I whispered back. The aisle stretched before us, not as a path of ceremony, but as a bridge between who I'd been and who I was choosing to be. My father didn't stand. My mother didn't offer her hand. Kyle didn't speak. But for the first time in my life, I walked forward without waiting for any of them, and I felt free. Walking down that aisle with Admiral Caldwell beside me felt like stepping into a different version of my own life, one where dignity wasn't something I had to fight for, but something I simply carried with me. The organs swelled, the guests rose, and for a brief moment I forgot about the ruined dresses, the scissors, the whispered insults, the years of being the other child. Everything softened, everything steadied. At the end of the aisle, David stood waiting. His eyes glistened, not with sadness, but with awe. The kind of quiet awe a man feels when he realizes he hasn't just found a partner, he's found an equal. But even as I reached him, even as he took my hands and whispered, "You're incredible," I felt the gravity behind me, the weight of my parents sitting stiffly in their pew, the tension in the room humming like an untuned piano string. Their shame wasn't the kind that taught humility. It was the kind that made people desperate. The officiant welcomed everyone, his voice soothing, trying to stitch calm into a torn morning. "Marriage," he began, "is about commitment, respect, and the courage to choose kindness." I saw my mother flinch. The words landed on her like a confession she didn't mean to make. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking like a man fighting demons no one else could see. Kyle stared somewhere at the floor, his jaw tight, eyes shiny with unspoken guilt. But they stayed silent. The ceremony moved forward in peaceful waves. Vows exchanged, rings held up in the soft light, voices trembling with sincerity. I felt something lift inside me, a burden maybe, or a chain I'd been dragging for years. When David spoke his vows, his voice steady and warm, I felt like I was stepping into a future that finally made sense. But the moment the officiant said, "If anyone has reason," my father stood. My mother gasped, grabbing his sleeve. Kyle's head snapped up. Whispers thundered through the chapel. The officiant froze mid-sentence. David tightened his hold on my hand. My father's voice cracked open the room. "I have something to say." Every muscle in my body went rigid, not because I feared him, but because I knew this was the last battle of the day, and I wasn't sure if he wanted to apologize, rage, or rewrite history one more time. He swallowed Adam's apple, bobbing hard. His voice faltered. I didn't raise her right. A hush fell so complete that even the organist lowered his hands. My father cleared his throat again. "We should have been proud," he said, staring at the floor like it might answer him. "We weren't." My mother blinked rapidly, tears collecting at the edges, but refusing to fall. "We didn't understand her," he continued. "Her career, her choices, her strength." His voice trembled, and instead of trying, we punished her for it. My heart thudded gently. Not forgiveness, not anger, just a sort of stillness. He forced himself to keep talking. "She's done things we never could, things we never tried. And last night was the worst thing I've ever done." My mother whispered, "Tom," but he held up a trembling hand. "No, she deserves to hear it. They all do." I felt the entire room shift. Not toward him, toward me, toward truth. He stared at me like he was seeing the child he'd lost somewhere in the pride he never had. I thought tearing those dresses would make her small enough for me to understand. A soft gasp swept through the older guests, but she walked in here, and I have never felt smaller in my life. My mother finally broke, then her sob echoing softly in the chapel this time, not embarrassed, not performative, but something fragile and real. Kyle's voice cracked next. I didn't want to do it, he muttered, eyes burning with shame. Dad told me to help. I was stupid. I'm sorry, sis. For the first time that morning, tears pushed at my eyes, not because they apologized, but because I'd never expected it. Not here. Not now. Not in front of an entire congregation. The officiant stepped back, letting the moment unfold on its own. No lecture needed. No Bible verse. Truth doesn't need narration. I took a slow breath. Thank you for saying that, I said, voice steady, though my heart trembled. But this isn't about the dresses anymore. My father's shoulders fell. I know. It's about every moment before them, I continued. The years of being dismissed. The years of being treated as less. My mother nodded weakly, her tears falling freely now. But I'm not here to punish you, I said quietly. I'm here to break the pattern. A murmur of approval rose around the chapel. Soft, respectful, deeply American in that way. Older folks can express without words. You're doing the right thing. I looked at my father. Truly looked at him. A man who had never known how to love someone stronger than himself. A man raised by a father who saw emotion as weakness. A man who repeated what he learned. Dad, I said gently, you can't undo what happened, but you can choose what happens next. His lips trembled. I want to try. My mother reached for his hand. For once she whispered, so do I. I nodded. The officiant stepped forward once more, clearing his throat gently. Shall we continue? I turned to David. He squeezed my hands and whispered, you're incredible. And for the first time in years, as I faced the altar not as a wounded child, not as a disappointed daughter, but as a woman fully standing in her identity, I felt something clean and light inside me. Peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't come from being loved perfectly, but from choosing to stop carrying old pain. The officiant smiled softly, lifting his hands. Then let us finish what we started. The ceremony resumed with a warmth that felt almost surreal. After everything that had unfolded, the confessions, the broken pride, the truth finally laid bare, you'd expect the room to feel strained or awkward, but it didn't. It felt lighter, as if the whole chapel exhaled with me. David and I stood side by side, and the officiant's voice settled back into its steady rhythm. He talked about partnership, patience, and the courage it takes to choose love even when life tries to pull you backward. I listened to every word, but with a part of my mind still resting on my parents behind us, on the weight that had lifted from their shoulders, even if they didn't quite know what to do with the sudden emptiness. When the officiant finally said, you may kiss the bride. David cupped my face gently, careful of the brim of my cover, and kissed me with a soft reverence that made the entire congregation erupt into warm applause. For a moment, all I felt was joy, but weddings last only minutes. Life lasts a lot longer, and reconciliation, real reconciliation, needs time. After the ceremony, the reception hall buzzed with emotion and soft music. Older couples clung to each other a little tighter than usual. A few veterans approached to shake my hand, offering quiet nods and soft, proud of you, ma'am, greetings. Women from the church hugged me, their voices hushed with admiration for what they'd witnessed. David's mother held me for a long moment, whispering, family can be messy, but they can learn. I hoped she was right. My parents sat together at one of the side tables. They looked smaller than usual, like people who'd been forced to see their reflections in harsh lighting. Not villains, not monsters, but deeply flawed, deeply human. I didn't approach them first. I let them sit with the truth. Eventually, Kyle walked up to me, hands in pockets, shoulders rounded, not with arrogance, but humility I'd never seen from him. Hey, he muttered. Hey, he swallowed, voice low. I shouldn't have touched your dresses. When Dad told me to help, I don't know. I thought it wasn't my place to argue. It was, I said gently, it always is. His eyes filled, not crying but close. I'm sorry, you didn't deserve any of that. I know, I answered. But thank you. He nodded, relief washing over him as if he'd been waiting his whole life to finally say something honest. Next came my mother. Her makeup was gone, wiped away with her tears, leaving her face strangely fragile. She took my hands. I was wrong, she whispered. I was wrong, and I'm ashamed, and I don't know if I can fix it, but I want to try. I felt something soften inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the armor of old pain. You can try, I said, but slowly, respectfully, on terms that don't hurt anymore. She nodded quickly, tears gathering again. I'll take anything you're willing to give. My father came last. He didn't speak right away. He didn't make excuses. He just stood there, hands shaking slightly, eyes unable to meet mine. When he finally did, his voice was small. "I don't know how to undo what I've done," he said. "But I'll learn if you let me." It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't what I had dreamed of as a child. But it was real. For the first time in my life, it was real. "We'll take it one step at a time," I told him. "But it has to be different." He nodded. "I'll make it different." And I believed him, not because of his words, but because of the way he looked at me, not as someone to control, but as someone he finally saw. Weeks passed, then months. David and I settled into a quiet rhythm, balancing married life with my responsibilities on base. My parents called, then they wrote, then they asked to visit, not to demand, not to pry, not to reassert old patterns, but to understand, and slowly, painfully, imperfectly, they changed. They went to family counseling, they listened more than they talked. They learned about the Navy, about my service, about the medals they'd ignored for years. My father even asked to attend a ceremony recognizing one of my junior sailors, standing at the back, hands clasped, watching with new eyes. Kyle called more often. My mother sent handwritten letters. There were awkward moments, missteps, old habits trying to claw their way back in. But every time I held my line with calm firmness, no yelling, no anger, just boundaries. And the strange thing was, they respected them. People don't grow when you scream at them. They grow when you show them what growth looks like. One evening, months after the wedding, my father sat across from me at our kitchen table. He held a mug of coffee like it was some delicate thing that might break. "I always thought strength meant control," he said quietly. "Now I know strength is standing your ground, without crushing the people around you." I smiled softly. It took me years to learn that too. He nodded, shame fading into reflection. "I'm glad you learned first. It saved all of us." For the first time, I believed him. Looking back now, I don't think about the ruined dresses. I don't even think about the scissors or the words, "You deserve it." I think about the chapel doors opening, about my brother's stunned whisper, about the way truth, quiet, steady truth, stripped away years of lies in seconds. I think about how families break and how sometimes they can be put back together, not the same as before, but better for having been broken. Honor isn't just ribbons on a uniform. Honor is choosing integrity when anger would be easier. Honor is letting hurt end with you, not pass through you. And if my story helps even one person breathe easier, stand taller, or forgive slower but deeper, then everything I lived through has meaning. So if you're listening to this right now and your heart feels heavy, or your family feels cracked in places you don't know how to fix, or you've carried hurt longer than you've carried peace, I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to rewrite the ending. If this touched you, share your thoughts. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're always welcome to stay a little longer.